This is Ashley with Real People Painting, and today I decided that we were going to do a lip study so that we can learn some of the facial features. So let's get started. So I decided to go off of what we had done last time when we used hands as our subject matter, and I decided that it would make sense for us to do facial features. So I plan on doing, eyes, nose, ears, mouth, and specifically because the mouth has so many different angles, so many different expressions, it was a good idea to kind of start on that, especially when you think about it. Lips are kind of weird. Like, it's literally just skin covering bone, and it's really kind of creepy. So to try and romanticize it, I made sure that when I picked a subject matter was somebody who had really full and tinted lips to help also with the paint. I do plan on doing eventually eyes, and like I said, probably ears and nose will end up being in one video because there's not too much going on there. So to start off, I wanted to state that I did look up stock photos. There are a lot of different websites that you can go on to find stock photos. Primarily, I use DeviantArt. I actually had a page on it forever ago, just at longlast.deviantart.com. It was really old, so but on there I found a stock photo artist, which actually she does other art as well, I think mainly photography, named Sophia Zhao. And so if you wanted to check it out, so the photos that I'm using as a reference today for the lips are from sophiaastock.deviantart.com. If you wanted to go and check out her stuff, she has a lot of other things besides stock photos of lips. But she does a lot of stuff for people looking for stock photo for photography, or for photography, I'm sorry, for Photoshop, or somebody who's using stock photos for references for paintings and drawings, etc. The work that I'm using of hers is unrestricted, so there's no worries on copyright infringement or anything like that. Which is another thing too, if you're looking up stock photos, it's good to look for specifics and make sure that you're giving credit where credit is due, of course. The nice thing about DeviantArt is also it does explain what an unrestricted stock photo would be. So the photo that I picked out today, I wanted to make it as simple yet interesting as possible, but for the sake of time, I decided to avoid anything that was a little bit too bizarre, especially considering involving teeth or anything like that. So maybe that's something that we can kind of touch on later. First thing that I started off doing is I did what's called an underpainting. So it's just a neutral color mixed with a white. I used burnt umber mixed with white, just titanium white, it was just easier. And so I get all of this down. This helps me out, so when it comes to if I accidentally make a mistake or anything like that, I can come back in later. And also it kind of adds a little bit of depth underneath the painting, so it's not going to just look very if you just leave it white, it looks kind of two-dimensional regardless of how much depth you put into the painting. So all right, so I'm gonna take my brush, and I know in my last painting I had done it where I'd used pencil to kind of sketch everything out. I'm gonna try not to do that today. There's nothing against it other than that it shows through really well, and you can use the paint that you're using to sketch it out in a way to help the paints in the actual painting. So let's see here. So I'm gonna start with the first line. This is just my base. You can see, I think that my underpainting is a little wet still, which actually kind of works to my benefit. Then I can use it to blend later. All right, so it's not all that deep. All right, so this is going to be where the top of the lips are. Yeah, a little bit. And then the bottom is actually a little bit more distance to the bottom one, so go like that. Now, the lips aren't really all that long in relation to how, like, there we go, maybe around here. All right, so if you look, the lips kind of curve up. They don't just go straight. So we're gonna go like this. Same on, make sure I got this line pretty well established. So I like tend to dry out the paint. So I do have like a gel medium to help slow things down, which actually I should probably bring out. There are different versions of this. It's a blending gel, and it helps the acrylics to slow down in their drying process. Other types of paints dry at different speeds, so like oil paintings. I don't remember the specifics on it, but I want to say that it takes like up to a year for an oil painting to officially fully dry, which is great for blending and everything. But when it comes to acrylics, especially with something like this, it's good to have something that's drying a little bit faster. You're able to kind of build up the layers a little better. So let's see here, I'm gonna thicken that line a little bit because I know that my middle line here is going to be dark anyway. I did put a little bit of the drying or the gel medium on my page so that I could pull at it when I needed it. Okay, so this one's going to come down here. Now the bottom lip is actually more flat than it looks. At the bottom, it does round, but there's actually at the very bottom right here, it's a little bit flat. So I'm gonna keep this bottom line just a little bit. Oh wait, that's not even the one I was wanting to use. This one, there we go. And then I'm gonna pull it up to the lips. I think my lips are gonna end up being a little bit more full than the ones that are in the picture, now that I'm seeing it. And I can still change it, that's a nice thing. Yeah, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go with this first one here. A nice thing about having the underpainting, like I mentioned, is that you can go back through and you can paint over it. And it's also good to keep your underpainting kind of simple so that when it comes to painting later, if you have a mistake you're wanting to fix, you don't have to go through and make sure that it's 100% matching this super intricate color that you had mapped out. So coming back up here, you'll notice there's like the bevel right here and the lips. So I'm gonna come down and kind of cut out this chunk. And it doesn't have to be super dramatic. A lot of it you can also accomplish that with, you know, shading later. I'll actually, on that note, I'll add it up here because this is where my shadow is going to come in. All right, so I believe for the most part, I'm going to put it in here just because this is where the lips start to kind of turn away from the light. And same with right in here. Right in here is where the lips meet. There's actually a shadow right in the corner of the mouth. All right, so just because I'm a little bit of perfectionist, I am going to pull a little bit of the burnt umber, a little bit of the white out, just so that I can clean up down here and so I don't get confused again. Look at that, and it's gone. It's like it never happened. All right, so we can start with, I'm going to continue to use this brush because I really like how it's applying the paint. I'm going to add just a tiny bit more of the burnt umber to the paint that I already have out. The nice thing is too, the paint that I already have out already has some of the gel medium in it, so it's not going to dry quite as quickly. And I'm going to paint in here where it's going to be the darkest, right where the lips meet. Grab a little bit more of the number. Still really, really light. Another thing too is that anywhere that there's wet paint still, I guess it really depends on the way that you want to approach it, but wet paint is good for blending later because I can just pull this into something else. Now it's going to be really dark down here. Up here is actually not bad. I'm going to just kind of go like this. kind of block out where my shadows are. And you can go really light with it too. Like I said, this is more or less just the underpainting. You can pull those paints forward later. All right, so on my palette, which I probably should have introduced first, for the actual painting itself, I have, I believe, ivory black, which is a cooler black. I've got titanium white, cadmium red medium. I have burnt sienna, raw umber, and cadmium yellow medium. And these are the colors that are going to kind of create the flesh tones, specifically focusing on the lips themselves. You're going to be using mostly the white, red, and yellow. The browns are used more to shade. I do have black mixed like on my palette just in case I need something. That's more because I really like contrast. And in certain areas, the raw umber, the burnt sienna, they're just not going to cut it. I meant to add a phthalo blue, or if, you know, actually I was going to use cobalt blue because it's a brighter piece, and phthalo blue is a little bit darker. Those are good when you're painting something that's meant to be white, because white is never just white. Usually it has a tiny hint of another color, and usually for like actual like organic things, it tends to be a little bit blue. You can also use a teeny bit of blue to help gray out things in flesh tones. But today, I forgot to bring it mostly. But also, you know, I mean, I'm not going to really need it with the subject that I have. So let's see here. I'm going to start painting the lips. So I'm going to get my flat brush, and I'm going to use just a little bit of the red compared to the yellow. It's going to create kind of an orangey color. I have multiple spots of white on my palette because whenever I'm working, I tend to mess up my white. And I don't want there to be too much mess going on. So if I need some just clear white, I wanted to make sure that I had it available. I'll grab just a little bit more of my red. The lips are, you know, they're pink, you know, so it's not just the flesh color, it's also going to have that tint. Also, I'm fairly certain that the person who's in this photo, if it is actually Sophia, was wearing some sort of like lipstick or gloss or something. So that looks good. All right, I'm gonna come in here and I'm going to apply. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna grab a little bit more red. And layer these things on top. Come in here, and I'm gonna go a little bit lighter with the paint so you can see it underneath. I'm gonna build up enough that you're gonna be able to see a little bit of what's underneath, but over time. So you can follow your contours here in the upper lip. And if you notice a mistake in how you were painting, maybe with your sketch, you have the freedom to be able to make adjustments as you go. I don't know if anybody's any kind of skilled in painting. I have a lot of bad habits, and I know I've said it before, but I feel like I need to say it again and just kind of apologize, because when you're painting, you're supposed to be painting from the wrists, and from the wrist and the elbow. And the way that I paint is very like on top of it. But in my defense, I started off painting, I started off my art, just everything with drawing, and I didn't touch a paintbrush until I was in like 17, maybe. and I had been drawing since I was like 5. So if you notice any sort of technique mistakes, don't hold it against me. At the end of the day, it's really what the end result is. All right, so the top lip here, I'm going to add just a teeny bit of my raw sienna, sorry. Just to create kind of like a darker blush tone here for where the top lip is in shadow. The top lip, really the only areas of the top lip, depending on the angle of the lighting, but at least for this one, it juts out at the top, but it curves under quickly. It's the bottom lip that ends up getting the majority of the lighting and the majority of the highlights. So the top lip, you're gonna have a lot more shadow, and the bottom lip, you're gonna have a lot more of that lighter, like paler colors. So I think I'm actually gonna add a little bit of raw umber. The raw umber is what I'm using really to darken everything anyway, so. All right, come here, you. There we go. All right, so the middle of the lip comes out. You gotta keep in mind, of course, the shape of the lip. So when I'm applying my darker colors, I want it to be the darkest in the corners and in the middle of the mouth, where it's obviously going to be the deepest shadow. So the lips aren't flat, so when I'm applying the paint, I'm trying to apply the paint in the direction that the lips are going. Alright, so right here, it's a little darker, right where the lips kind of like poke out a little. Definitely darker in here. Don't be afraid to really like kind of dab at the paint or the canvas as well, because as you're applying more layers, it's going to take longer for it to dry. So you're going to have paint underneath, and you can use that paint underneath to help blend. Okay. So let me do the bottom lip a little. Just while I'm on that, let that top lip dry a little. Another thing with acrylic too is that you can use water to kind of like help to spread it a little bit more. It dries so fast, especially in these settings where I've got, you know, a lot of lights on, it dries it out even faster. So even though my blending medium is helpful, because the blending medium actually doesn't take away from the texture of the paint because it matches the paint itself, it just helps it dry slower. But in some cases I want the paint itself to be thinner, so I'll add a little bit of water along with it. So I'm going to take a little bit of the white and pull it to what I have existing on my palette and start on the bottom. You see the bottom lip, there's more light, there's more surface area that this light is hitting. It's a lot paler. Going to cover up a good portion of what I've already done. But if you can tell just from the color on my brush versus the color that's on the canvas, some of the darker pink is actually showing through the paint. Because even though it is mostly opaque, depending on how much you've thinned it out, it's going to show through a little bit, which is actually what I want. It helps out with blending. Earlier with the darker lip on top to help blend underneath. So I'm going to put this in the middle. Now there are different types of painting applications you can use. Right now, for the sake of the fact that I'm a little bit out of my element in painting standing up, usually, like I said, I'm really like on top of my my painting, and I'm usually like really detailed. I'm making very short movements. So considering how, like I said, out of my element I am, I'm going to be using what's called a more painterly approach, which is where I'm actually I'm not blending it as smoothly as you would see in some other paintings. I'm making the paint a little less blended. That's where you'll see me dabbing at the paint or the painting. I'm going to take some of that lighter color up here and help to kind of smooth this out. Another thing to keep in mind when you're choosing whatever technique you're wanting to use for your painting, aside from your own personal preference or style, some subject matters make more sense for some styles of painting. Like, for example, if you were going to be painting, let's say, like a polished stone or something along those lines, where it's just all one color, it's very shiny, it's very smooth, you're not going to be wanting to use like a painterly approach. You're going to be wanting to use smooth blending. But this one, you've got all of the wrinkles that you'll find naturally in lips, and so these, this blotting here actually works to your benefit. So add a little bit more white. I'm not even going to bother blending it, and I'm just going to kind of put it on top. And as I'm dabbing here, you'll notice that it's actually blending everything together. Great. So you don't have to pay as much attention to the top. There's not as many shadows. But what I'm going to do, or not as many shadows, I'm sorry, not as many highlights. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually switch gears. While my paint's still wet, while I've got a little bit of time, I'm going to take a smaller round brush, and I'm going to go in and add some of these shadows that are just making everything, the lack of the shadows, really I'm noticing it just makes everything look so flat. So I'm going to come in here. Now I know that right here it's going to be really dark. Follow this line. Now the top lip comes up just a little bit, so I'm going to pull my shadow up more, a little bit more. This is the raw umber for the record. So far I've not touched my black. It's probably going to change. Alright, so right here there's a little bit more of a shadow. So I'm going to allow myself that, which felt like a mistake right here. So the lip kind of comes down just a little bit right here before it reaches the corner of the mouth. All right. I'm going to blend this in with what I've got existing on top. I'm going to start using lines. The closer we get to the surface, like the top layer, the more you're going to want those lines to help show your texture. Alright, a little bit more. Got too much water there. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to use just a tiny bit of black. It's just not holding up right now. I think part of the problem is that I think I have a little bit of, yeah, that's my problem. Be careful whenever you're using water too. It'll accumulate on the brush and it'll drip down into the bristles, and then it'll water down your paint. So when you're trying to get that crisp color, you just can't because it keeps acting against you. So I'm going to be terrible and get right up on my painting. I need this to be really dark in here. And it's not super dark the entire way around. There's some areas where it's a little bit lighter than others. Right. I'm gonna let that one go for a little bit. I'm gonna switch back to the bottom lip. Alright, so it's gonna be more red in the middle. And I don't know if you've noticed, but what I'm doing is I use the colors from both of these shapes to help kind of create the lines and create the form for the top shape. So like here I'm going to be using this to help make my inside line a little bit more crisp and refined. Add a little bit more white. The nice thing about this palette too is that all of these colors I'm using are all being used pretty much with everything. So if I end up including a little bit more white here, then it's not, you know, if I get a little bit of color in my white or something along those lines, then it's not going to be the end of the world because I probably could use that color. Right, so some of my highlights up here. Again, if you make a mistake, like right here, I accidentally came up a little bit high. Come back through. I'll take that small round brush that I was using before. Just fix it. Alright, I'm going to let this dry for a little bit because I think I want to work a little bit of the flesh tones on the outside. I'm also going to want all of this to dry so that I can blend a little better. Add a little bit more of those colors, those tones that I'm really wanting. Okay, so flesh tones are identical more or less to the colors that we've already been using. It's just really how much yellow, how much red. I'm coming in here and I'm just kind of pulling some of my shadows out because there's no real hard line. It's just a matter of blending. So for my flesh tones, try out that brush here. Again, we're using some red, which I grabbed kind of a lot. More yellow than red, but I'll keep that right there just in case I wanted to add more. And because it's significantly more pale than the lips are, you're going to want to add a lot more white than you did for the lips. And like I mentioned before, you can add a tiny bit of blue to make your flesh tone. It does help to add a little more natural look to it, but considering the rest of it doesn't have it, I'm not really too worried about it personally. Right, so we'll be very light. This is actually going to be the base color that I have right here on my brush, and I'm going to work with this base color to be able to make the highlights and the low lighting rather than mixing them individually. So this is a nice stage in the painting too, because you're able to kind of see it the way that you really wanted it to be. And if you have any areas where you're feeling like you don't like the shape, you can reshape your lips as well. I'm just kind of applying a little haphazardly around the edges. I did come in a little bit farther than I wanted to right there, so I'm going to have to come back around to that. But like I mentioned before, all the lines that you have, everything can be worked with, everything can be adjusted. Also keep in mind the direction of your brush. So, add a little more water as this is drying out. Actually, you know what? I'm going to add some of my blending medium. That'll help a lot more than the water will. Water's going to evaporate. It's good for thinning, but it, you know, and it'll help a little bit if you're looking for like it to be a little bit smoother in your application, but it's not going to help it with its dry time. So, see, I keep coming in a little bit close. There we go. You can tell that I'm not as comfortable with using the brush far away. So if you can see here, this is actually the perfect example of the underpainting shining through. So you can actually see a tiny bit of the like lightened raw umber from underneath it, and it's making the skin tones here look a little bit less saturated. So I'm trying to use the edge of the brush here. And you can see as I'm painting while everything is drying out, I'm going to use a lot more of that blending medium. Now be careful when you're using it because it does sort of dilute the color a little. So if you can see in here, actually in my underpainting, I've used a little bit of the drying medium. It thins it just a little bit because it is, you know, it's the same texture, but it doesn't have any pigment in it. And so the pigment is being stretched further and further the more you use. So when you're using it, you got to be careful that you're not over diluting it, which might be part of the reason you're able to see as much through this as you can, but I want to be able to build with this. So I'm just kind of like laying this down. And come up here. So even though I'm painting over these, I know where my guidelines are here. So I'm not too worried. That was more for the sake of visuals while I was painting the rest of the lips here. Okay. Now I'm gonna take, I'm gonna take a round brush, but not the one that I was using earlier. I want to use something a little bit bigger. A little bigger. Not too bad. Okay. And I'm going to use this to be able to outline the top up here. And you can use the paint to kind of mold what you're doing here. And I'm actually going to step to the side over here so I can get a good angle on it. When I'm painting, I like to flatten the brush and use that edge to help kind of carve out where I'm wanting to paint. Why taking care of your paintbrushes is so important. If you have a paintbrush that has bristles in all crazy directions, you can't keep the same control that you need to be able to make these sort of lines. Another bad thing, you're not supposed to touch it, the painting, you know, with your hand. Just exactly what I'm doing right now. Don't tell. I had an art teacher in high school who is like a living saint, and I refer to her, and so basically anybody in her class would refer to her as their art mom. And if she were to see me doing this right now, like I just know the look that she would give you. It's just, she would look at it, and she may not even say anything. She'll look at it and she'll go, and like just straight up and just walk away. And then you just feel that just like, oh, what did I do wrong? Now, all that to say, obviously it didn't change the fact that I'm still continuing to do these things that she hates, but still, like I said, it's about the outcome. And it's not like this is anything more than something I'm doing because I enjoy to do it. All right. So there's some areas that I do know I need to clean up. So like if you see around the lips down here, there's a little bit of the underpainting showing through. I'm going to go back to using my flat brush wherever I hit it. There's a lot of paint that was kind of building up the base of the brush, so I'm going to come back through here. And I'm going to grab more white. I've still got some red there, so I'm going to use that for my white, my yellow, pull my red in. A little bit of red goes so far, so just be careful. Right. I feel myself like slouching. My materials are so far down here. I'm used to working like at just a tape at the front. Alright, so my skin tones here, I need to add a little bit more yellow because it's looking too pale. And at least in here it's got a little bit of a rich kind of glow to it. Okay, there's too much yellow now. Mixing paint is seriously, it's a process. And it always will be. Doesn't matter how many paintings you do. You'll see it in your head, you'll know which colors you want to use, but when it comes to actually putting them out here, like you'll add a little bit here, you'll add a little bit there. It's good to keep it simple. It's good to keep it, you know, as uniform as possible, but you're not always going to get that. So just something to keep in mind. Don't beat yourself up over it. I once learned, this was in like forever ago maybe, and when I was taking classes for illustration, I once was told if you're going to be painting a big painting and the color that you've mixed is exactly the color that you need, or that the color that you're mixing is a little bit more intricate, that like, you know, there's a lot more moving parts, a lot different, you know, multiple colors maybe, mix a lot of it. They sell tiny little paint cups that you can, you know, with like, you know, lids and everything that's just perfect for you to be able to save pre-mixed colors. I used to do it all the time until I just ran out of patience and just stopped. But if you're going to be painting a big work, it's a very good idea. Right, so I'm coming back in here. I had added a lot more white so that I could add highlights through here. Okay. And so there's more highlights right here. You're going to see at the very top of the lips, which I'm actually going to just straight up add regular white. There's actually a really nice highlight right here. And that's because that's right where the lips are the highest in the top. When applying as much paint as I am up here, you need to be careful that you're not pulling the paint away. It still needs to be able to sit there. Okay, so there's a highlight right here. See, this is what I'm talking about. I accidentally kind of made a groove instead of applying the paint like I wanted to. So I'm going to come back in, grab that really little round brush that I had. See? Tiny. You can shape it ahead of time, by the way. Also, this is a new apron, but typically my aprons and like are just covered in paint. When I was in high school, I was taking AP Portfolio, and I had almost every pair of jeans I owned, and even I would even say, like, to this day, I don't really personally like jeans, so I don't have them as many, but all of the jeans I do own have paint on them, because I just don't even care. I'll just kind of wipe it on my leg and keep going. But you can shape the brush ahead of time, so when you go in, you don't really have to do much, you just have to kind of like go in the direction of the brush. So like in this case, it's a round brush, so I'm rolling it. If it was a flat brush, I'd just be kind of spreading it. Okay, so let's go in here. This one's nice because it doesn't take as much effort to lay the paint. Now the shadow, or the highlight up here is a little bit lighter. And I'm going to use this brush now to sort of blend everything back in. Now the highlight comes back down just a little bit, and then it stops. The lighting is on this side of the lips more than it is on this side. So this up here, I had put it down out, like I had mentioned why. My paint is drying out over here. So I'm gonna lay this down even though it's not the right color, and I'm gonna come back in and I'm gonna add just a teeny bit more red, like a tiny, tiny bit. Water. I'm going to add a little bit of my burnt umber. It's going to create the shadow. So I've already laid this down here, so I can come back over and I can just kind of paint straight into it. Now closer to the lips, you can leave some of the lighter tones, because as it gets, you know, as everything kind of turns upward, it's going into light a little bit further. So, alright, here we go. Alright, so I'm going to go back through. So there were these, these shadows in here that I kind of painted over. I'm going to pull them back out. It's going to take a little bit to kind of bring it forward. You don't want to just slap paint on there either, because with all of the layers, you're going to notice, like with it, you know, when it's done, you'll see where you didn't build it up. If you just kind of, if you build up everywhere else and then right here you're just like, it's gonna stand out. Just gonna do this on this side also. This shadow on this side isn't quite as obvious as the other one. I'm going to go very lightly and kind of pull it back out into the rest of the paint. And I can come back and use paint, the actual flesh tone later too. So, underneath here is a very rich shadow. And note the fact that when I'm painting this, I'm kind of following the direction that the shadow should be going in. So out here it's darker. I'm gonna pull back around here. I'm following the shape of the face while I'm laying out the shadows. So it gets pretty dark under here. I'm gonna just straight up add my raw umber right underneath here. I feel like I should apologize. My voice has been junk for like a month now. For the long weekend with MLK Jr.'s birthday, my husband and I went up to Daytona Beach for just a little bit, and the temperature went from a nice like 70, maybe even low 80s, and it tanked down to like 40 degrees. And in that time, I got sick, and I ended up with just this awful cough that would not go away, and it just completely killed my voice. Actually, I would have been doing this way sooner if it wasn't for the fact that I couldn't talk for like at least a week. So you see here, I'm coming back around and I'm cleaning up certain areas just because I didn't even clean my brush. I've already got that brown umber on here. So I can come back around and smooth out certain areas that maybe my shadows were a little bit too harsh. So like right through here, the lips kind of like, the skin around the lips, around the chin, kind of come forward a little bit right in here. So I'm going to leave that highlight there, but I'm going to extend the shadow just a little bit further. Now on this side, it is significantly darker. I'm going to add a lot more of my raw umber. Kind of pull it in. Now be careful though, because I don't know if you can really see it right here, and in the photo there's actually a highlight that runs right along here. It's very, very pale, and it more than likely ends up having more to do with the coloring in the lips themselves than it is with the lighting, but it's good to keep in mind. So my shadow that's right here actually extends down quite a ways, and you're not able to see where the lighting kind of changes as the chin turns out. So I'm going to make sure that this comes down pretty far. Right. Pull in a little bit of my regular flesh tones back over here. I'm spending a lot of time on this, even though it's not the lips, but if you have a funky background, like the supporting details don't quite measure up to the rest of it, it really impacts the realism of the rest of the painting. So you want to keep in mind the kind of supporting details is what I would call it. So a little bit more shadow right through here, because it's darker, but it's not really coming out in my opinion yet. And it leads up. This is where underneath are the teeth and the jaws kind of like coming forward. Right. You can see with the way that it's kind of not blending as nicely as I'd like it to, that my paint is drying. Next time I do this, I'm going to bring maybe like a little water bottle that's not like spray everything randomly. Which I've done that before, like something that I'm working on long term, and I know that my paint's going to dry out faster than I need it to, and I'll just kind of spray it down a little bit. Okay, some shadow. It's looking pretty good. I don't like the fact that I just sort of like stopped right there. It's bothering me. Oh gosh. Even my OCD just kind of like randomly kicks in. Alright, so another thing to keep in mind, I'm only painting the lips here. I'm not going up high enough to include the nose. So if I want to kind of just make everything look really sketchy around the edges, it actually helps to focus back in on the lips. So that's the point in all of that. Now I'm going to go back into painting on the lips here, because we've given it enough time that it's really been able to dry, and we can help to accentuate the colors and accentuate the highlights a little more now that it's been a little bit. So I'm fairly certain that my paint's mostly dried. Yeah, so I'm going to make new paint. Alright, so I've got my red and my yellow. I'm going to make my orange. And like I mentioned before, it is nice having the palette colors being used pretty much throughout the entire thing. So you don't have to worry about accidentally using a color in there that doesn't belong. A little bit more red. A little more white. Come here, my white. These are the ones that I didn't even mess with before. And they were so perfect just sitting here. And I ruined them. I mean, that's what they're for, but still. Alright. One thing I am doing that I don't recommend is using my paintbrush to mix it. That actually is really bad for the brush. And if you can't tell, so it went from being nice and thin and pointed to now it's really kind of chunky. But I'm using enough paint here that I can kind of make adjustments as I'm painting. It's not quite as bad. All right, so I've got a lighter color. I'm gonna come back down here and I'm gonna layer it. All right, and I'm going to do a very light job. Actually, I'm gonna even add a little bit more white down in this corner. The bottom lip is a lot lighter than I'm letting it be. Now the lightness of it extends down, but I'm going to be very, very soft, kind of feathery with my paint application so that the colors that are underneath can show through. Same thing with up here, because even though we've got a lot of highlights going on, it's leading into that deep shadow where the lips meet. Right now, up here, I'm going to go back, grab some of the paint I was using before. And I'm going to, actually, I need a little bit more red. Just a little deeper on top. I'm going to focus mostly on the lighter areas. So I've got right here, and I'm applying paint really softly right now. And if you remember, up here, there's that light little highlight right up here. So you know that it's going to be a little bit lighter coming along the top. Now you see how I'm applying the paint and I'm going in lines rather than left to right. I am doing this so that I can have the texture of the lips included here. So there's a little bit lighter up here, but really not much. And my paint is actually kind of dry, so I'm more or less dry painting right now. So I'm only applying just a tiny bit here. Now underneath the paint that I had picked up is a little bit of that white still, so if I press down, you'll get a little bit more of the white shining through. Now the shadows in here, after applying the flesh tones, I'm noticing are way darker than I want them to be. So I can come back through, add a tiny bit of my raw umber to a section, and go over it just a little to soften it a little. So let's see, right in here. And note the fact that I'm going really softly up against my shadow so that I'm not really overpowering it completely, sort of just letting it help out. Try to make sure when you're doing this though that you're not changing the direction of the shadows or the lips. A little bit more my umber here. Now there's so many layers that are involved in here that you're going to notice times when you're going over everything and you feel like you might be messing it up, or you might feel like that you liked it better the way that it was before. And that's actually, it's okay, because having all of these layers, you're able to make these kind of slight manipulations that you wouldn't if you were only doing it like block colors, you know? Like right in here, I missed this color. And I feel like it needs to be a little bit lighter on the top right here, so I'm going to add a little bit more white. I'm going to do it in a way that it doesn't change, that it's not, you know, super obvious either. And you can a little bit, like, yeah, we'll just throw that on there. Alright, so the top lip is more or less in a good place. I think that it could be a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more red to my shadows down here. Same goes for right down here. And right here where that shadow kind of comes up from underneath. Alright, so we're actually almost finished. I'm going to leave the top lip alone because I'm going to flipping ruin it if I keep messing with it. And I'm going to focus on building up the highlights on the bottom. So I've got that pale portion right here. I think I grabbed a little bit more. There we go. So lightly bring that up a little bit higher. All right. Very lightly going over here. This out here actually reaches the corner. Pull it down so that it meets that shadow down here. Kind of blend it. A little bit too far down. I still got it up here, so I'll fix that. There we go. It's like this rich blended area. Okay. I'm going to take some of my white and add it to the existing paint that's already there right here. And I'm going to, in an even thinner line, kind of apply some lines here. Smooth them out. Now this stage, the faster that you get it on there, the better it's going to be for blending. So I'm going to add just a tiny bit more white, and do it again, but even smaller. And this is going to be the line that is almost entirely highlight. So definitely want to go in with lines rather than blending. You, by just applying this paint, are blending. So you don't have to worry about it being entirely noticeable. My very last application here, I'm going to do some of my detail work where the light is the most obvious. So she's not wearing gloss, so I want to make sure that it's not like super chunky. And this highlight actually extends out almost to the edge over on this side. I'm going to add a teeny bit up here. There's actually, let's see, I think I've got most of it done. Now, another thing I'm going to do, actually, before I'm completely done. So along the top of the lip, it's actually this, like I mentioned before, it's this really rich and nice highlight. And I feel like it's not showing up as nicely as I want it to. So I'm going to go back around it. Okay, so I'm not a huge fan of how this top line goes here. Another thing is, the longer you work on something, I swear, the less you like it. The more you tend to kind of mess things up. There we go. I'm happy with it. Alright. Some OCD. The shadow comes in tubes now. A little bit. Match the shadow down here. Which is not. layering. And just a tiny touch up here, but I don't want a lot. I'm actually going to clean my brush and then just kind of wash it in. Alright, so after all of that fun work, and at this point it looks pretty much nothing like my original sketch, and that's actually a good thing because you can't see any of the lines underneath. But here we have the finished work, so you can see all of those layers absolutely paid off. So if you liked it, definitely like, subscribe, hit the bell, and comment, please. Like, you know, nice things, please. Nice, you know, be nice. But, if you have any suggestions or anything that you wanted me to paint, I do plan on doing a facial series. So the next one is most likely going to be eyes. You know, obviously I'm going to be doing nose and ears, but it's not going to be quite as in-depth. So again, if you like it, show me. Like it, subscribe, ring the bell, all that fun stuff. Right? And I will see you next time.